Hi, I'm Landon Robinson, and in this presentation, I'm going to be going over a failure mode and effect analysis report. Now you're probably saying to yourself, well, Landon, that sounds like a lot of letters and stuff. What does that stand for? Well, it's quite simple, really. It stands for failure mode and effect analysis. Essentially, boiled down to its simplest form, what it really means is, what is this equipment? What does it do? How can it go wrong? And how bad can it go wrong? And also, how can we make sure that this mode of failure doesn't happen? So the piece of equipment that I chose for this particular report is known as the abrasive grinder, or as it's most commonly referred to as in the industry, the angle grinder. So all throughout this report, anytime you hear me use the word angle grinder, just know that I'm referring to the abrasive grinder, just because it's more commonly referred to as an angle grinder. So an angle grinder has a whole bunch of different names. It goes by the side grinder, disc grinder, cutoff grinder, but everybody just calls it an angle grinder because you can grind at different angles. So what is an angle grinder exactly? Well, an angle grinder is defined as a handheld power tool designed to be used for the grinding or abrasive cutting and polishing of various different solid mediums. Now, among the many different types of tools that are used, among the numerous different types of careers and trades, very few can really compete with the utility and versatility of the angle grinder. And one of the many reasons why this tool is so versatile and widely used across so many jobs is because it has the capability to utilize various different types of interchangeable discs, which are also referred to as wheels due to their being shaped as wheels. So, for example, this particular piece of equipment is most commonly found in construction sites and fab shops. This is because the angle grinder is used, as the name implies, to grind and remove metal or other materials to shape and or polish a solid medium, essentially. So this is crucial and invaluable to welders in welding shops or construction sites that require a clean surface for the metal to have a really strong and clean weld adhered to. So the welder may also use an angle grinder to cut various lengths of metal, or after welding it, could shape up the weld, blend it in, or just clean up welds and smooth them over. Maintenance crews may also utilize an angle grinder when modifying equipment or retrofitting a new guard, for example, onto a pre-existing machine, for example. Now this may be to trim parts of the new guard or other bit of the machinery to ensure a proper fit is applied to the new piece of equipment. Now this is simply a small selection of the various systems that utilize an angle grinder. Now to properly understand the intended function and operation of this piece of equipment, we need to follow the flow of energy as it flows from the source all the way through the equipment and the material itself. Now modern angle grinders are almost exclusively powered by electricity. They receive this electricity in either one of two ways. These two configurations being a cordless battery, which is attached to the bottom of the machine, or through a cord wired directly into an outlet. Now, as the electricity flows through the source of the power up to the angle grinder, it is only until the angle grinder's power switch is activated that it can function. Now, there are two primary switches that are used to activate an angle grinder. These two primary types of switches are lock-on switches and paddle switches, which are also commonly referred to as dead man switches. Now, lock-on switches, as the name implies, once you turn it on, it stays on until you turn it off. On the other hand, paddle switches, which are also commonly referred to as dead man switches, only stay on as long as the paddle is depressed. The second you let go, it shuts off. Now, upon activating the switch of an angle grinder, the machine's motor begins to function. Now, the power that these motors and these angle grinders can supply can range really anywhere from about 1/3 of a horse to more than 5 horsepower. In an angle grinder, an abrasive disc, also previously mentioned, it is referred to as a wheel, is attached to the end of the angle grinder via a locking disc, or sometimes there is a nut built into the actual wheel that you twist onto the end of the grinder and it locks on by itself. Upon activating the angle grinder, this wheel is spun at several thousands of rotations per minute while contacting the material surface in order to remove material from the surface. Angle grinders are really dangerous. I mean, super dangerous. Okay, so onto the failure mode and the cause and effects of the failure mode. Okay, so it's already been established earlier in this report that angle grinders have relevance among various different types of trades. Now, this only further emphasizes that the chances of a mode of failure occurring in a system at any given time are extremely high. Out of all the modes of failure that an angle grinder can enter, It's my personal belief and my personal opinion, and that's just my opinion, SE says I can have an opinion, that the most critical of them all is an occurrence and phenomenon known as kickback. So kickback happens when you're using an angle grinder and the grinding or cutting wheel grabs onto the material and jerks really hard one way. Now, it will generally jerk in the opposite direction of the way that the wheel is spinning, which is almost always towards the operator. Now, this is most likely to happen when you're using an angle grinder and you're using the wrong type of wheel or you're using the wrong cutting speed. Now, the reason that I believe that kickback is the most critical mode of failure is because it is the parenting cause of a whole bunch of other different things. A lot of horrible things that can happen because of kickback. Kickback is extremely unpredictable, and it can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. It should also be noted that the event of kickback happens so fast that it can hurt the operator just before they know it. So should the operator fall victim to kickback, if they're not wearing sufficient personal protective equipment, they can suffer fatal injuries, such as lacerations of the cutting disc, which is still spinning at several thousand rotations per minute. So this means that if it grabs the operator's personal protective equipment, or their clothes, or God forbid it rips into their flesh, it's gonna keep traveling up until it gets you like a fish. So it should be noted that this grinding disc, if it hits you, is still spinning at thousands of RPMs. So if you're grinding with it and it catches onto you and it rips you open, it can kill you graveyard dead. Now this, needless to say, would have a devastating effect on the system should it happen to an operator. So now on to the criticality assessment level. The criticality assessment level, on its surface, is a relatively simple scale. 1 being the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen, and 3, which is sort of like a eh. So in terms of the angle grinder, I would give it a criticality rating of 1. So kickback from an angle grinder is more than capable of producing gruesome and painful injuries. It can kill you graveyard dead. The fact that angle grinder kickback is so hardly predictable, and also because operators who fall victim to kickback are not prepared to handle it and they're caught off guard, this increases the likelihood that they will be more severely injured. So let's say kickback happens. An operator's using an angle grinder, gets a little too close to their clothes, and it snags onto him. Now who's gonna win that fight? You or the angle grinder? Because I bet you dimes and donuts, that angle grinder is a lot stronger than you are. So for those reasons alone, I am more than certain that a criticality rating of 1 is a more than adequate assessment rating for this piece of equipment. The angle grinder, in my opinion, is the most versatile piece of equipment you can have. It's also, in my opinion, equally the most dangerous piece of equipment you can have. With the risk of kickback and consequences of injury always looming over those who choose to operate an angle grinder, it is of the utmost importance that there are steps taken to prevent this from happening. Now, one of the best proactive steps that an operator can take to decrease the likelihood of an injury due to kickback occurring is that ensuring that a guard is attached to the angle grinder whenever it's in use. So the implementation of a guard is going to decrease the risk of the spinning grinding disc getting caught on the operator's clothes, personal protective equipment, and most importantly, their skin. Now, the implementation of additional personal protective equipment such as face guards or gloves can also decrease the chance of injury due to kickback. It's also important to recognize that you should never jam the grinding or cutting disc or apply excessive pressure onto the workpiece, as this could provide more opportunities for the disc to catch the workpiece and kick the grinder back towards the user. A tool is only as safe as the operator that's using it, and the angle grinder is no exception. Ultimately, it's up to the operator to be knowledgeable on how to prevent and handle kickback to reduce the risk of it occurring and causing injury. All right, well, that's all I got. Take off.